Hey everybody, welcome to the special YouTube Live with Charles, GMAT Club's resident expert and founder of GMAT Ninja Tutoring. If you're just beginning your GMAT preparation, you obviously are preparing for the GMAT's Focus Edition, as the classic version of the GMAT is not available anymore. We all know how GMAT Focus is structurally different from the GMAT Classic Edition and what new content it offers to the GMAT students. But how can you utilize this new format of the GMAT to improve your GMAT score? That's what we're going to find out in today's session. So, if today we're going to be extracting 5 special tips from GMAT Ninja's goodie bag to make the right beginning of your GMAT studies. Before we begin, guys, please make sure to like this video and also subscribe to our channel for more GMAT preparation tips and resources. So, Charles, for someone who is just beginning with their GMAT studies, what is your first tip for planning their GMAT preparation? And what do you think is a right start of the GMAT preparation?
Yeah, really simple tip here. Take a practice test early. So familiarize yourself just a little bit with the question type so they're not coming out of left field. Do a little bit of quant, a little bit of verbal, a little bit of data insights. Take an official practice test just to get a feel for how far you have to go. And be really honest with yourself. So let's say your goal is a 655, and if right out of the gate you get something in the 300s or 400s, be honest with yourself, it's going to be a really long ride, but it's really, really useful to get that data point early. Make sure it's an official practice test from MBA.com. First 2 tests are free at MBA.com. So hit one of those early once you're a little bit familiar with the question types before you start binging on a bunch of content, because you want to have a sense of what exactly you need to focus on early on.
Makes sense. Okay. Now, when it comes to the second tip, let's talk about preparing for the quant section of the GMAT Focus. How should someone prepare for it?
So a lot of people are going to really be turned off by this, but I really want you to focus on the foundations first. And I mean that in 2 different ways. One is that GMAT Focus Quant in particular, it's really kind of built on a base of algebra, arithmetic, word translations, kind of still basic algebra. If you have any holes there, you want to address that first, because everything's going to be built on that. The temptation often is to kind of go chasing the exotic question types. Ooh, I'm bad at probability. Let me go do some of that. Well, probability is about 2% of GMAT Focus Quant questions. Or, hey, combinations, permutations, again, about 2%. So focus on those basics first. And you might be surprised in what your weaknesses might look like. It's all stuff that you've learned maybe way back in high school or even before that, but make sure that those basics are really, really strong. The other thing I mean when I say basics is on an adaptive test like the GMAT, they're going to knock your head off for making careless errors. The test is trying to find the level of question at which you get about half right, half wrong. So if you miss questions that you're capable of getting right, you miss those easy, whatever easy might mean for you, that's when your score can go plummeting really, really quickly on the GMAT. So as you practice right out of the gate, I want you to focus on being really disciplined about reading your questions twice, checking your work. So when I talk about kind of practicing those, kind of that base of the test, the algebra, arithmetic, word problems, don't tolerate careless errors from yourself. So make sure that you're being really disciplined. If you miss a question and you go, how the heck did I miss that? That's actually the biggest problem you can possibly have on this test. So really focus on great execution on those foundations. If you have that's 60 or 70% of the battle done on quant. And I'm not exaggerating. That makes it sound really easy, but avoiding those careless errors is so much harder than it sounds. One of the things many of you maybe heard me say before is, hey, sometimes 7 times 8 is 42. It just is. You're going to make that mistake. You got to learn to check it, especially on an adaptive test. So that's what I want you to focus on first. Bulletproof on things you know how to do, and really, really comfortable with all of the algebra, arithmetic, basic word problems.
Makes sense. Okay. Also, guys, I will definitely be taking up your questions, so please comment them down below. But since you just gave us a tip about quant, I would ask the same for verbal.
So verbal, be patient with yourself. If you need a big improvement, be really patient with yourself and make sure that you practice really, really steadily. So the temptation that a lot of beginning GMAT students have is, hey, I'm going to binge on verbal, or I'm going to binge on quant, or maybe binge on data insights, do one at a time. Please, please, please don't do that. If you have weaknesses on verbal, especially now that on the GMAT Focus, the verbal section is just 2 question types. It's just reading comprehension and critical reasoning. That's it. And there's not a lot you can learn. It's not like you're memorizing grammar rules or memorizing vocabulary. It's not a knowledge-based section at all. It's about how precise can you be in reading, reasoning, pulling everything you need to pull out of a passage. And that's a skill that just takes time to develop. There's really no shortcuts. Yes, there are better and worse ways to approach those question types, but there's no shortcuts. It's not something you can do overnight. So very early in your studies, even if you feel like you're bad at quant, or better still, you might be excited about studying quant. And if so, that's fantastic, because honestly, some of it can be fun. Verbal is kind of the thing where a lot of people go, well, what am I doing here? Maybe I'm watching some videos to get a sense of how to approach these. And then I'm just doing lots of questions and analyzing my results, and then trying to figure out what I did wrong and how to approach it better next time. And then I do more questions. And it is not sexy for a lot of people. Some people enjoy it. Most people don't, unfortunately. But pace yourself. Make sure that you're starting that process really, really early, getting several really good verbal practice sessions in every week. And you can't sit there and do 6 hours of verbal in a day. So just be prepared to do, a really strong hour or two, several days a week. That's it. But over the long haul, and be patient, because improvement usually takes time.
Yeah, someone said, "Hey, Charles, big fan."
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Since we covered quant quickly and verbal, someone also did ask about data insights. So they're saying that they have a hard time managing their whole time in the data insight section. Any tips for that?
Yeah, great question. What data insights, a couple thoughts there. One is that the whole joke of data insights, not the only thing that makes it hard, but it's bits of quant, bits of verbal, and kind of things that sort of look like real world data. And I mean that in the sense that, if you have kind of a normal corporate job, people will drop reports on your desk, and sometimes they're written terribly, and they give you a bunch of extra information and things that are hard to understand, and writing these charts where you go, how did that intern come up with that chart? That doesn't make any sense. That's the data insights section. You're going to see stuff that you just look at and go, what is this? So a couple thoughts there. One is, yes, prepare yourself psychologically, and yes, practice the questions and get a feel for that over time, but brace yourself for kind of this, these data displays that are imperfect by design. That's kind of the whole idea. So that's one part of it. Tactically, though, in terms of your time management, the way I want you to think about it is, hey, it's an adaptive test. Again, they're trying to find the level of question at which you get roughly half right, half wrong. It is really hard on data insight to get all 20 questions right in 45 minutes. Very, very few people can come remotely close to that. Even if your goals are really lofty, even if you're going for, even a 700 plus on the GMAT focus, which is a super, super high score, you're still probably not going to get all the data insights questions right. That's just not a realistic target for most people. So the way I want you to think about it is, if you look at a question and go, I really don't know how to do this, mark it. So guess, mark it. You can do that. Move on. Your goal should be maybe 15 or 16 questions done really carefully, really methodically. Don't make careless errors on them. And if you have to guess on 3 or 4 or 5 of them, that's no problem at all. And remember, you can go back and change up to 3 of your answers if you have time at the end. So be really, maybe aggressive is the wrong word, but be really strategic about saying, you know what, I could really get stuck on this one for a while. Let it go. So don't try to be a hero. Don't be a perfectionist on data insights in particular. 15, 16, 17 questions answered thoughtfully, thoroughly is wonderful.
Makes sense. Okay. Also, I can see a lot of you guys have joined, which is awesome. If you're a big fan of Charles like I am, please leave a like to this video. Go, 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 go now. All right. I'm going to bring up the next question. So someone here said, I am at the end of my prep and I still make careless mistakes. Nothing to do with content, but with anxiety that comes from time pressure. Whatever I read goes out the window and my mind draws blank.
Yeah, thank you so much for the comment, Antonio, because this is so common. So the academic studies say that about 40% of adults have test anxiety. I actually have a lot of reason to think, number one, that's older data. Number two, GMAT test takers in particular. I actually think that number is higher. So at GMAT Ninja, about 70% of our students have enough test anxiety that we advise doing something about it. It's really tough. So a couple thoughts. The way I would think about it is, and again, different people watching this probably have different levels of test anxiety. There are people I'm sure who get a little bit of butterflies in their stomach on test day. Thought number one, a little bit of anxiousness is a good thing. That's your body telling you that you care and this matters to you. If you don't care about something, you're not going to get nervous. We all should get butterflies in our stomach walking into the test room. It's unusual if you don't. So that's the first thing I want you to have in mind as you walk into that test room and you feel a little nervous. Everybody does. I still do. And that's natural and normal. Thought number one. Thought number two, we can talk about test anxiety a little bit in isolation and say what kinds of things might help you. And I'll get into that in a second. The second piece of kind of what you're describing that's super, super common, which is why I think your comment is phenomenal, because I can guarantee a ton of people feel the same way. It's the careless errors, or the unforced errors, maybe to put it more broadly, because they might happen on any of the 3 sections. those have their own causes. And then the anxiety and the carelessness kind of have a feedback loop that I think can really get you on test day. So let's talk about kind of the unforced errors to begin with. Where do they come from? When you're sitting there without time pressure, practicing, let's say, official guide questions, goal number one as you study, especially if you're new to this, stamp out those unforced errors. Learn how to be really systematic in your approach. And for any question type, we have tons of videos out there where we talk about what do we mean by a systematic approach to reading comp. Here it is. Here's what I want you to practice, and then hone that process for yourself. But you want to make sure that you have a very specific way of approaching each question, so that when that question pops up on the screen, you go, okay, reading comp, here's what I'm looking for. Here's the kind of notes I'm taking. Here's what I'm doing with the answer choices. Here's how I'm using cross-elimination. And that you do the same thing in practice every single time. The idea is that if you get really, really good at that, that you get a little bit of jitters on test day, and you're more likely to say, okay, I'm a little bit nervous. That's good. I care. And I'm still going to stick to my plan. I approach reading comprehension a certain way. I approach quant a certain way. So as you practice, I want you to really focus on consistent, repeatable process that you do every single time. And that's going to help you a little bit on the anxiety side. Now, the anxiety as well, tons of things you can do. And it's not one of those things you can address overnight. But things that feed into it, if you're sleep deprived, you're going to get a lot more nervous. 8 hours of sleep a night, almost everybody needs it. Academic studies back that up. A lot of us might be on 6 hours of sleep. If you have small children, you might be on less sleep than that. And yeah, I don't function as well. And we don't function as well. And the studies are really, really clear on that. Sleep well, you're going to be less anxious. Get exercise, take care of your diet, have a social life, be a balanced person. Those are really hard things to do. A lot of people are busy. Those things matter. Meditation has been proven in studies to help anxiety. Reset routines. If you start to get nervous during your test, push yourself away from the computer, take a deep breath, close your eyes, maybe do some deep breathing, something like that. Different things you can do to just reset yourself. Spend 20 seconds resetting. Lots of things like that you can do. I don't want to go too much deeper into it, but those are all things that are very addressable. And as much as anything, Antonio, anybody else watching this? Yeah, this is normal. You are not alone. Very few people are willing to be open about it. So again, Antonio, really appreciate it. Thank you for bringing it up.
Awesome. All right. Before I take up the next question, guys, like this video and subscribe to the channel. That way we'll find out if we should do this again. All right. Question from Roshni. What's a good score on 90 for each section to start with on the first practice test if you're aiming above 700? And they also mentioned also.
Thank you so much, Roshni. Appreciate it. Thought number one is for everybody, be a little bit careful with target scores right now, because what I'm hearing from a lot of people is somebody in your life might be saying, oh, well, I got into these top schools with a 700, or 700 is this magic benchmark. The score scale changed with the GMAT focus. So 700 on the old GMAT is equivalent to a 645 or a 655 on the GMAT focus. So you may or may not really need a 700. Maybe, something around a 645, 655 is a better target. So be really, really careful with that. If somebody gives you the advice, you need score X, make sure that you understand what they mean, old GMAT or new GMAT. Go to GMAT.com and translate those scores. Make sure you know what you're getting after. As a starting point, if you're pretty new to this, I'd say that if you can get around an 80 on all three sections, I think that's a really, really strong starting point. One thing that is kind of nice about the GMAT, the new GMAT, this was not the case with the old one. It doesn't really matter where each section is weighed equally. That wasn't exactly the case with the old GMAT. So if you, let's say, get let's say a 615, and your goal is a 655, that's 40 points. So wherever you can get the most points on the individual sections is where you should pursue them at that point. Again, if you're really terrible at verbal, you're not going to have a shot at a score like that. If you're terrible at quant, there has to be some balance. But what I think schools are going to be doing is saying, hey, we're not very worried about your skills as long as you can get an 80 or above on each section. We're going to feel really good about how you're doing. Not to say that you have to get there for every school, but I think that's going to be a key threshold for admissions. And then from there, it doesn't really matter where those extra points come from. So yeah, if you're in the neighborhood of an 80 starting out, you're in really, really good shape for a pretty high score.
Awesome. Someone did mention about like scores, like what is a good score out of the 805 in your opinion?
It just depends on your profile and where you're applying, and it really is that simple. Look at the score averages for the schools you're applying to. Again, some people can. Typically, schools are publishing medians. They might be publishing 20th percentile and 80th percentile. You want to be somewhere in that 20th to 80th percentile range. Typically, if you have a weaker profile, You want to be more towards the top of it or even above it. If you have a stronger profile for that particular school, then it's okay if you're toward the bottom end of that range. But start there, and remember, what you see reported on a lot of websites right now as we film this in early 2024, these are going to be on the old GMAT score scale. So make sure you translate it. Again, a 700 old GMAT is equivalent to a 645, 655 on the current GMAT Focus Edition. So make sure that when you're looking up that data on average scores, make sure you know what you're looking at. If it ends in a 0, it's the old GMAT. It ends in a 5, it's the new GMAT. Make sure you translate it so you know what you're going after. But 700 used to be a really key threshold in a lot of places. That's a 645 now. So just make sure you're doing your homework on what your schools are looking for.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Next one. Hello, I would like to ask you whether wrong answers will have a deduction in the score. Thank you.
Yeah, wrong answers hurt your score. But again, adaptive test, it's not totally linear. So it's not that the number of questions you miss doesn't determine your score directly. It's which questions you miss. So if you miss easy questions, you're not going to see the harder questions. Your score is going to be a lot lower. You can miss all the hard ones you want and get a great score. So one of the fun things about adaptive testing, this is true of the GRE, executive assessment, certainly the GMAT, it's not about the percentage right and wrong. It's which ones you get right and wrong.
Makes sense. Okay. Also, Mario Costa said,
Thanks,
Charles is great. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Mustafa says, hi, Charles. Hope you're good. How important is the selection of order? I chose quants, then verbal, followed by DI. But after the quant section, I was a little fatigued and I caught myself adrift.
Yeah, great to see you here, Mustafa. So I wouldn't, so from kind of if I'm giving general advice for a general audience, I wouldn't say that hey, this is the best section order. There's nothing like that. It's not that there's some fundamental advantage to starting with verbal or starting with quant or starting with data insights, but I think you're thinking about it the right way, Mustafa. And again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing any names. That you want to think in terms of what works best for you. Some people like to put in, again, whatever easy means for you, your comfortable sections. Some people like to warm up with a section that is comfortable for them. So let's say that you feel great about quant and pretty good on verbal and terrible on data insights, for example. Maybe you start with quant to warm up and feel comfortable in the test environment. Some people like to do that. Some people, even in that exact same sort of preference of sections, some people prefer to do the opposite. I get really I don't feel great about my data insight skills. Let me get that out of the way. And I'm comfortable on quant. Let me put that at the end. So really it's personal preference. It's understanding yourself and what makes you tick. If you felt fatigued after quant, then are you better off putting it later? I don't know. That's unclear to me. Maybe that's a broader issue of stamina and just not getting fatigued in general, because it doesn't change the length of the test. But it's just knowing yourself and knowing kind of how you work. Do you want your harder sections, your less comfortable sections, or your more exhausting sections early? Yeah. Or do you want them late? So that all comes down to personal preference, unfortunately.
Makes sense. FYI, Charles, we have a lot of questions.
Awesome.
Just saying. All right. Next one, Calvin. What's the best way to get into the mindset for verbal practice and review, or do you recommend something else?
Yeah, I mean, this is another one of those classic, kind of depends on your needs and your preferences. I think, certainly practice is so crucial. You can't go memorize a bunch of explanations or here's the key facts about reading comprehension. There's nothing like that that's going to be helpful for you. Really critical reasoning either. Yeah, there's some people go studying logic. I'm not sure it's all that helpful. It's not necessarily terrible, but I don't think it's immensely helpful. So it really is about practicing and then understanding what's driving your results personally. So when do you misread something? When do you miss a question and you go, hey, I thought I understood that. How did I miss that thing? Okay, are you misreading? Were you skimming? Were you obsessing over details, missing the big picture? Any number of things you could be doing. Yeah. If you're struggling as you practice on your own, if you're struggling to sort of understand your errors or understand kind of what are we really trying to do here, that's where watching some videos might help, or taking a course, or maybe even hiring a tutor can help you. If you're like, I don't really understand what I'm trying to do. I don't like my results on verbal, but I don't understand what I'm trying to change. Yeah, that's where sometimes, getting some help. And again, just could be free videos might be the best starting point, can certainly help you understand really what are you going after and how might you change your behavior to make your results better.
Makes sense. Okay. Philippe asks, Charles, what is the best time management technique for GMAT Focus in your opinion?
To quote one of the other tutors at GMAT Ninja, bail when you flail. If you start flailing around with a question, let it go. Don't be a hero. Don't get stubborn. And just accept that it is unbelievably difficult to get every question right on the GMAT focus. The questions get hard. It's an adaptive test. When they get hard, they can get real hard. Miss all the hard ones you want. That is no problem. That's not going to ruin your day. It's not going to ruin your score. So quant and data insights in particular, where I think it's easier to look at a question and within 30 seconds just go, whoa, I have no path forward here. You look at a question and go, I don't have a path forward here. Great. Guess, mark it, move on. Remember, at the end of each section, you can change up to 3 answers. You can review anything you want to. So take advantage of that feature. To be fair, on verbal, it's a lot harder to take advantage of that because you don't necessarily know you're in trouble on a question, and sometimes on data insights as well. So reading comp passage, well, you don't really know you're in trouble until you've done almost all the work. So verbal, you can't really apply that as cleanly. I think on verbal, what you don't want to do is start rushing through. I see people kind of doing all these artificial things where they say, oh, well, I'm going to make sure that I do the first 6 questions in 8 minutes or whatever. Those numbers don't make any sense, but I see all kinds of kooky things that people are trying to do. And if you start trying to rush through verbal, you're going to misread things. You're going to make silly errors. You're going to miss easy questions. That's the kiss of death on an adaptive test. Miss all the hard ones you want. So on verbal, if you're having a hard time with time management, the not very useful piece of advice is, okay, focus on how to become more efficient in how you approach things, but that's something that takes time. If the question is, how do you manage your time on verbal? Hey, you do your very best, be as systematic and as accurate as you can, as efficient as you can. If you start running out of time and you still have 3 questions to go, take your guesses at the end, because I'd rather have you miss the last 3 questions if you've been really accurate on the first 20 on verbal. That's still going to be a really good score. But if you start rushing in the first 10 just so you can get to the end, you miss easy questions, and that's going to destroy your score. Missing a few at the end is not a big deal. So don't freak out about missing the very last question or last couple questions on a section. That's not going to do that much damage to your score.
Gotcha. Okay. Another one, how to make ourselves not burn out besides nervous. Although I found an easy question, I was just too burned out in answering.
I'm not sure if you're referring to kind of burnout in general, where you just get so exhausted that for weeks at a time it's hard for you to study. It sounds like you're not referring to that. Not burnt out besides. Yeah, not quite sure what you mean by that. As far as the burnout, and maybe this is just a general study tip, pace yourself. So we see a lot of people, especially people on GMAT Club, doing these heroic 12-hour study sessions on Saturdays and Sundays, and that's terrible for you for a lot of reasons. You're going to start getting sloppy and inaccurate, and you're going to get more. You're developing the skill of being sloppy and inaccurate. You don't want that. So when we work with students one-on-one, doing private tutoring, about 2 hours of homework per weekday, really focused, high quality practice, maybe 3 or 4 hours per weekend day. We very, very rarely see anybody who's doing anything useful after hour number 4 ever. Very, very rare, because at that point, you're fatigued, you're making silly errors, and you're just getting better at making silly errors. So be nice and steady. Get yourself on a sustainable study schedule. And again, I apologize, Aviation, if this isn't quite answering your question. But just make sure that your study schedule is really, really sustainable. So again, 2 hours a day is fantastic. If it's really good, high quality practice, that's enough. Maybe a little bit more on the weekends. Don't binge. That's where a lot of the burnout comes from. And again, it sounds really lame. Nobody wants to hear it. Not sexy advice. Take care of yourself physically. Like, do not sacrifice sleep for studying. A lot of us did that as undergrads, and that's great. There's good reason to do that sometimes. I crammed at the last minute for my exams as an undergrad. You can't do that for the GMAT, because if you're tired, you're going to perform badly. This test is more about execution and performance than it is about learning stuff. So take care of yourself, have some balance in your life, and you're just going to get a better GMAT score. This isn't me being nice. It's advice to do better on the test.
Makes sense. Okay. Someone, Ankan, has said, I practice nearly 7 to 10 CR questions every day. Will it suffice, or do I have to increase it? But I find it difficult to concentrate for more than 10 CR questions in one stretch.
Yeah, that makes me nervous, because what are you going to face on the test? You've got to concentrate for 2 hours and 15 minutes, plus sort of the whole business of the test environment. Even if you're doing it at home, you got to get set up, and there's the security checks and all that stuff, and your breaks. I mean, it's that's something that drains your battery. You can think of it as a 3-hour experience, even though it's only 2 hours and 15 minutes of testing time. So you're only going to do somewhere between 9 and 14 critical reasoning questions on the test. I mean, on that reading, on the verbal section. But you're going to have critical reasoning like things in data insights. Some of it feels very much like critical reasoning. So it makes me nervous if you're having a hard time concentrating for more than 10 CR questions. My hunch is that there's a broader stamina and focus issue that's going to undermine you when you try to sit down for that whole, again, not 3 hours of testing time, but 3 hour long experience of showing up to the test center. You'll be there for a good 3 hours from when you walk in the door to when you get your score and you walk out. So I don't want to say, oh, you must do 25 questions at a shot. I don't want to be that prescriptive about it, but that's probably a sign that you're going to have a hard time getting through a full test on test day with your energy intact. And I would advise you to do longer sections. We like to give LSAT sections to our students. They're harder than the GMAT. The level of language is more dense. 25 questions per section, reading comp and critical reasoning both. I'm not saying you have to do that, but it's something that you do enough of those, and battling your way through just 23 questions that are mixed critical reasoning and reading comp on the GMAT verbal section doesn't feel so bad anymore. So that's one way to kind of get your stamina up if you want to go down that road. But again, just warning you, they're hard and they're going to feel hard.
Also, Charles, I think we'll stay live for another like 4-ish minutes. And I'll try to make sure to bring up as many questions as I can. Guys, if you're liking this type of YouTube short session, please like this video. It actually will make us know if we should do this again. And also subscribe to our channel. Thanks. All right. Pooja is saying, hey, Charles, good to see you. Can you please suggest how to remain consistent throughout the preparation?
Great question, Pooja. Great to see you here as always. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is kind of what the advice I was giving earlier about a really good sustainable study schedule. Don't binge. A good high quality 2 hours a day. Fantastic. And just be really thoughtful. Don't binge on quant or verbal or data insights either. Keep a nice mix. It's okay if you want to save data insights for closer to your test just because there's a limited supply of questions. That's okay. But certainly if you have any weaknesses in quant and verbal, just make sure you're addressing them nice and steadily. And that should hopefully keep you afloat for long enough to get to where you need to be. But don't binge. Don't burn yourself out.
Makes sense. Navshinder is saying, hi, Charles. Is the GFE section adaptive as well, or is it just adaptive within a section?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's so it is, each section is adaptive. So your quant section is adaptive, your role section is adaptive, and so is data insights. I don't want anybody to worry about this too much. How well you perform on previous sections does affect the starting point of your next section. So the starting level of your second section will be based in part on how you performed on the first section. Please don't worry about this. It's something that makes the test a little bit more efficient. It's what allowed them to make the test shorter, which is what happened when they switched from the classic to the GMAT focus. But it really shouldn't affect anything you do. Don't let that impact your section order. It's not really going to affect your final score in the end. The honest answer to your question is yes. Each section is going to have some impact on the subsequent sections. But for you as a test taker, don't worry about that one bit because it can get inside your head and it really isn't going to affect your score. So yes, the whole test is adaptive technically, but it really isn't a big deal at all.
Makes sense. Okay, next one. Ankit saying, I think this GMAT Classic versus GMAT Focus Edition score difference range will decrease with time as more and more people will give the Focus Edition exam. Your thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting topic. I've actually asked some people at GMAT, so the designers of the test, including their lead psychometrician, I've brought up the same question, and they kind of said, yeah, very possible, because all of these percentiles and these equivalence tables and all of that for the GMAT Focus, it's based on people's performance on the old integrated reasoning section, which didn't really matter. It wasn't part of the composite, very minimal part of the admissions process. So the assumption, a reasonable expectation is that data insight scores will go up over time, and so will composite scores. Will it go up enough that sort of the equivalences that we're using now, old 700 is equivalent to a new 645 or 655? I don't think that gap's going to close completely. But yeah, certainly reasonable. There will be changes in the percentiles over time. As test takers, don't worry about it. Focus on what's in front of you and don't worry about any of that stuff. It's not going to affect your life at all. But for what it's worth, yeah, we would expect those scores to change over time.
Makes sense. And I'll take up the last question, guys. So if I missed yours, ask it in the next session. But Roshni saying, when I get to the last question, even if I have 2 or just below 2 minutes left, my mind shuts down. Should I practice all the questions on a timer?
Well, I don't think it's fine to spend a little bit more, a little bit less than 2 minutes per question, right? You
Yeah.
don't want to be too rigid about it. I think when people say, hey, I'm going to do every quant question in 2 minutes, sometimes it just kind of gets you into bad behavior of being sloppy. So I'm not sure I would do that. Practicing everything with a timer doesn't sound great. I think the bigger skill is, yeah, when you're running out of time, take a deep breath and go, I'm going to do my best with what I've got until time runs out. And I think that's the skill you want to develop and the mindset you want to develop. I think practicing everything with a timer is probably going to induce some sloppy behavior that you probably don't want. So I wouldn't go down that road, but just
Yeah.
focus on, hey, use every time, every second as best you can, and don't stress about it. Remember, you're not going to be perfect. Please prove me wrong. If you're perfect and you're watching this right now, email me and say, haha, you're wrong, Charles. I'd love it. But
Yeah.
accept that the test gets really hard. Let questions go. If you run out of time and you have to guess on the last couple, it's not going to ruin your day.
Makes sense. Okay, I think we covered most of it, or I tried to cover most of it. So this was awesome. Thanks a lot, Charles, for doing this. I hope we're gonna do this again. Again, guys, like and subscribe. But we are going, like, if you're looking for some solid motivation for GMAT prep, you guys can check the pinned comment for a collection of exceptional GMAT success stories, and obviously go and binge watch all of GMAT Ninja's videos on our YouTube channel. Like, he is the god of GMAT. That is what I've been reading on our YouTube comments, by the way.
That's really sweet. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Selma.
awesome. Thanks a ton. I'm gonna end this live and see you guys in the next live session.
Thank you, everybody. Have fun studying.